Have you ever wondered why rejection cuts deeper than almost anything else a man experiences? It isn't just the sting of someone saying no to you. It's the way rejection slams into your chest like a reminder that you weren't chosen, that you weren't enough in that moment, that the door you wanted to walk through closed before you even had a chance to prove yourself. And yet, beneath that pain, something else begins to form if you don't run from it. Rejection, as brutal as it feels, is the furnace where unbreakable men are made. Imagine this: you finally build up the courage to ask her out. Your palms sweat, your throat tightens, and you push through the fear of humiliation. You lay your intentions bare, and she pauses that slight hesitation that tells you the answer before the words even mum. Then she shakes her head, apologizes politely, maybe even smiles. But what you hear is not just no. What you hear is you're not worthy. And in that second, every insecurity you've buried roars awake. That's rejection at its core. It pulls the covers off your hidden doubts. That's why it hurts so badly. It doesn't create the wound, it exposes the one that's already there. Most men think rejection is proof that something is permanently wrong with them, that she didn't like your looks, or your status, or your energy means you're forever flawed. That's a lie. Rejection is just feedback, sometimes harsh, sometimes unfair, sometimes random. But it forces you to confront what you believe about yourself. If you think you're inadequate, rejection proves it. If you think you're strong, rejection sharpens it. The pain of rejection isn't the enemy. The real enemy is what you choose to believe about yourself when it happens. Here's the trap many men fall into. They start chasing validation harder after being rejected. A woman ignores their message, they double text. She pulls away. They shower her with attention, desperate to claw back her approval. They think persistence equals strength, when in reality, it signals weakness. Because every time you overinvest after rejection, you're teaching her and yourself that your worth depends on her response. You're handing her your power wrapped in desperation. So how do you shift? The first step is detachment. When rejection hits, resist the reflex to explain, to argue, or to prove yourself. Do nothing. Silence is power in that moment. She doesn't owe you an explanation, and you don't owe her your self-worth as collateral. Picture this: she turns you down, and instead of spiraling, you breathe, smile, and walk away with your head high. That's not arrogance. That's a man who knows rejection doesn't define him. That's a man she'll actually remember. But here's where it gets tactical. Rejection can also be a weapon women unconsciously use to test you. She may flirt, then pull back. She may accept your invitation, then cancel last minute, just to see how you'll react. If you respond with anger or neediness, she knows she can control you. If you respond with calm indifference, she realizes she has no leash on you. This is where rejection becomes your ally. It's a filter. It shows you instantly who's trying to play games, who's not aligned with you, and whether you're in control of yourself. Instead of begging for entry, let rejection redirect you. That's how you grow. Think about it like strength training. When you lift heavy weight, your muscles tear slightly. It hurts. But in recovery, they grow stronger, denser, more resilient. Rejection works the same way for your spirit. Every no you face is a tear in the fabric of your ego. But if you process it right, those tears rebuild you with a thicker armor, a deeper calm, a sharper edge. A man who's been rejected dozens of times and still stands tall radiates something different. He's unbreakable because he's already faced the fire and survived. Now, don't misunderstand, rejection will never feel pleasant. It's supposed to sting. That sting is what forces you to evolve. If every woman said yes, you'd never learn resilience, boundaries, or discernment. You'd think the world owed you ease. But rejection keeps you grounded. It reminds you that nothing is guaranteed. And that reminder, when accepted, becomes fuel for focus, growth, and power. The man who refuses to let rejection destroy him becomes the man rejection can no longer touch. So the next time rejection comes, and it will watch yourself closely. Do you panic? Do you chase? Do you crumble? Or do you stand still, breathe deep, and move forward as if nothing essential was lost? That choice decides whether rejection breaks you or builds you. And make no mistake, brother, the world is watching how you handle that moment. Because the man who cannot handle rejection will never handle power. Have you ever done this, begged for a woman's attention after she pulled away, only to regret it later? What's the hardest rejection you've faced that still lingers in your mind? Which reaction do you see yourself making most often when the door closes? Be honest in the comments. Rejection doesn't just test your confidence, it exposes the hidden bargains you make with yourself. Deep down, most men think, if I give enough, if I prove enough, if I show how much I care, then she will finally choose me. But rejection slams into that fantasy like a wrecking ball. It shows you that effort doesn't equal desire, that generosity doesn't guarantee love, that sometimes, no matter how hard you try, the answer will still be no. And that realization is either the moment you collapse, or the moment you start to rebuild yourself as a man who cannot be broken by circumstances outside his control. Let me ask you, have you ever been strung along by a woman who kept you in the gray zone? She gave you just enough attention to keep your hope alive, but never enough commitment to let you breathe easy. You told yourself she just needed time, or that one more act of kindness would tip the scales. And then, one day, she disappeared into someone else's arms, leaving you with nothing but the echo of your own over-investment. That is rejection in its most brutal form, not a clean break, but a slow erosion of your dignity. And it happens because you didn't see the signs, or you ignored them, hoping for a different outcome. Here's what you need to understand. Women rarely reject a man outright at the start. More often, they test him with subtle cues. A delayed reply, a cancelled plan, a sudden coldness after a moment of warmth. These aren't random behaviors. They are silent questions. Can you hold your center when I pull away? Will you crumble? Or will you stand? The trap is that most men fail this test. They overcompensate. They text more. They plead for reassurance. They chase the very attention that's being withdrawn, not realizing that this desperation is what kills attraction entirely. The strategy here is brutal in its simplicity when attention is withdrawn. You must withdraw twice as hard. If she cancels, you don't argue. If she goes cold, you don't warm her up. You match the energy, not out of spite, but out of respect for yourself. Think of it this way: every withdrawal is an opportunity for you to show whether your mood depends on her or whether it's anchored in yourself. If you can stay calm, focused, and detached, you send the message that your world doesn't collapse because she pulled a lever. That's what women remember. Not the man who begged, but the man who remained unmoved. But let's take it deeper. Why does rejection build unbreakable men? Because it rewires your relationship with fear. Most men live in constant avoidance of rejection. They silence themselves. They settle for less. They bite their tongue when they should speak. All because they're terrified of hearing no. Rejection, when embraced, kills that fear. Once you've been rejected enough times and survived, the word no loses its power. Suddenly you're free, free to risk, free to ask, free to pursue what you truly want without the leash of anxiety. That freedom is what women secretly crave in a man, the man who wants her but doesn't need her, the man who moves toward but never collapses when pushed away. Here's a story you'll recognize. A man falls in love with his co-worker. He spends months orbiting her, doing favors, making jokes, building rapport. In his mind, he's investing in a future where she finally notices him. One day, he confesses his feelings, and she responds with the dreaded line, "I just don't see you that way." He collapses, humiliated, angry, lost. But what if he handled it differently? What if, instead of clinging to false hope, he smiled, thanked her for her honesty, and pulled back without resentment? Suddenly, the power shifts. He is no longer the man begging for her recognition. He is the man who values his own time enough to walk away clean. That is how rejection transforms when you stop seeing it as proof of your unworthiness and start seeing it as a filter that saves you from wasting your life where it doesn't belong. The battlefield is your response. Rejection will come, you can't avoid it. The question is whether you'll let it chain you to resentment or free you into clarity. The men who are destroyed by rejection are the ones who believed that a woman's acceptance was oxygen. The men who grow from rejection are the ones who realize they were breathing fine without her all along. And once you grasp that, no one can take your composure away from you again. So the next time you're tempted to chase after someone pulling away, stop. Ask yourself, am I proving something to her, or am I protecting something in me? Because every time you choose protection over proving, you strengthen the armor that no rejection can pierce. That is the path from fragile boyhood into unbreakable manhood. Have you ever ignored the early signs that cancelled plans, the slow replies and kept pushing until she finally cut you off? Did you tell yourself stories to justify her coldness, only to regret it later? Or have you experienced the rare power of pulling back first and watching how differently she responded? Share your story in the comments. Rejection is not just a single moment, it's a mirror that keeps following you long after the door closes. You replay the words in your head. You question your worth. You compare yourself to the man she chose instead. And here's the harsh truth: rejection often feels worse than it should because you tie it to your identity. You tell yourself, she didn't just say no to the date. She said no to me as a man. That's the mistake that keeps men weak. You confuse situational rejection with permanent worth. And until you separate the two, every rejection will bleed you dry. Picture this: you're at a party. You see a woman you're drawn to. You gather the courage to approach. And halfway through the conversation, she excuses herself, barely hiding her lack of interest. For the rest of the night, you don't see the dozens of people enjoying your presence. You don't see the friends laughing with you. You only see her turning away. That's how rejection works. It narrows your vision until you make one woman's disinterest the center of your reality. And that tunnel vision is poison, because once you believe that her choice defines you, you hand her control over your emotional state. So how do you break that grip? The first shift is to recognize patterns. Women reject for reasons that have nothing to do with your value: wrong timing, wrong mood, wrong type. Sometimes she isn't even rejecting you. She's rejecting the idea of a relationship, the weight of commitment, or the echoes of her past experiences. But most men don't pause to see this. They instantly translate every no into, "I'm not good enough." That translation is what crushes them, not the rejection itself. This is where strategy matters. When a woman turns you down, your instinct is to prove her wrong. You want to change her mind, to show her she overlooked something valuable. But what you don't realize is that every attempt to flip her choice only cements her rejection deeper. You're telling her, your decision controls me. The stronger move is to accept it instantly, without bitterness, without convincing, without games. A calm acceptance signals that you don't need her yes to validate your masculinity. Ironically, that is the very energy that makes women second guess their no. They don't expect composure, they expect collapse. Give them the opposite, and suddenly you stand out as the man who doesn't beg for reconsideration. But let's get tactical. Suppose she says she's not interested. Instead of firing off long explanations or disappearing in anger, you respond simply, "No worries. I wish you the best." Then you redirect your attention immediately to your friends, to your goals, to another conversation. No visible crack in your composure. What happens then? You train yourself to detach your value from her choice. You teach yourself that rejection is just redirection. And over time, this muscle becomes unshakable. The more you practice it, the less rejection feels like a wound, and the more it feels like a sorting process. She chose out. Fine. That just cleared the path for someone else to choose in. Here's the deeper layer. Rejection is not about her at all. It's about whether you secretly believe you're enough. Because when you know you're enough, a rejection doesn't diminish you. When you doubt yourself, rejection feels like confirmation. That's why some men spiral while others barely flinch. It's not the woman's words that decide, it's the story you tell yourself afterward. And this is where rejection can transform you into something unbreakable. Every time you survive it without collapsing, you're rewriting that story from "I wasn't enough" to "I didn't need her approval." That's how confidence hardens into steel. Now, let's address the manipulation side. Some women will reject you indirectly, not to leave, but to control. She may threaten to walk away if you don't comply. She may withhold affection to bend your will. These aren't rejections of you as a man, they're rejections of your boundaries. The wrong move is to chase her harder in fear of losing her. The right move is to call the bluff. If she threatens to go, let her go. If she withholds, remain unmoved. Because the moment you cave to conditional affection, you've trained her to use rejection as a weapon. But if you stay grounded, you flip the dynamic. She realizes her tactics don't work, and she either respects you more or leaves entirely. Either way, you win. Rejection builds unbreakable men because it forces you to live without illusion. It strips away the fantasy that women owe you love, that effort guarantees reward, that approval is permanent. When you've lost enough times and still kept walking, you stop being fragile. You stop being the boy who thought love was a prize to win. You become the man who knows rejection doesn't end you, it refines you. Have you ever had a woman pull back affection just to see if you'd chase? Did you give in? Or did you hold your ground? When you look back at your hardest rejection, was it really her no that hurt? Or the story you told yourself afterward? Which story are you still carrying today? Share it in the comments. Rejection teaches you a language most men never want to learn: the language of silence. Not the silence of cowardice, but the silence of restraint. When you face rejection and don't lash out, don't argue, don't prove yourself, you are training your spirit to master its own energy. Because the truth is, men who cannot handle rejection become dangerous to themselves. They spiral, they obsess, they stalk, they drown in bitterness. Men who can handle rejection with calm detachment become untouchable. They no longer need the world to give them constant validation. They've tasted the sharp edge of loss, and it no longer scares them. Think about the first time you were rejected by someone you really wanted. Maybe it was in high school, maybe later. You thought she was different. You thought she was the one. You built her up in your head like she was the prize that would finally make your life feel complete. And when she walked away, it felt like death. You couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. Every song, every corner of the city reminded you of her absence. But now look back, you survived. You grew. Months later, the pain dulled, and you saw her clearly for the first time, not as a goddess, but as a human being who simply wasn't meant to be yours. That lesson right there is the seed of unbreakable manhood. You lived through the storm and discovered you didn't die in it. The mistake many men make is trying to avoid rejection at all costs. They play it safe. They don't approach women unless they're sure of a yes. They stay in lukewarm relationships, terrified of being left. They silence their desires to maintain peace, but safety is slavery. When you live avoiding rejection, you live avoiding truth. You never discover who truly desires you, who truly respects you, who truly chooses you without conditions. Rejection, when faced head-on, is the knife that cuts away illusion. Without it, you'll never know your own strength. Here's the practical part when you are rejected. Don't let your mind spiral into what if. Don't stalk her social media. Don't compare yourself to the next man she's with. Don't drown in fantasies of what could have been. That's how men torture themselves replaying imaginary versions of reality. The better move is immediate redirection. Channel the energy into your body. Go train, go run, go lift. Channel it into your purpose. Build your skills, your business, your craft. The pain is fuel if you direct it. Left unmanaged, it becomes poison. The difference between the unbreakable man and the broken man is where that energy goes. Now, let's expose another trap. Some women reject you not with words, but with inconsistency. She says she wants you, but her actions don't align. She's hot one day, cold the next. She gives just enough to keep you hooked, but never enough to truly commit. That's a form of rejection too, the rejection of stability, the rejection of clarity. And if you tolerate it, you're telling her, my worth is negotiable. The tactical move here is brutal but necessary. Match words with actions. If her actions don't align, you stop investing, you don't argue, you don't complain, you don't try to fix her. You pull back and you let her inconsistency disqualify her. That's how you protect yourself from the slow, silent form of rejection that destroys men more than any outright no ever could. Rejection also trains you to see abundance. When you're fragile, you treat every woman as if she's your only chance, your only shot at happiness. That scarcity mindset is why rejection crushes you. But once you've been through enough, you begin to understand one woman's no is not the end. It's simply one page in the book, and the book is long. The moment you grasp this, you stop clinging, you stop begging, you stop living in fear. You realize there will always be others, not because you're entitled to them, but because life doesn't end with one closed door. The unbreakable man knows abundance because rejection has taught him not to chain his entire identity to one response. Now picture this, you're on a date, and she says she doesn't feel the spark. Instead of trying to convince her otherwise, you smile, you pay the bill, and you leave with dignity. Days later, she thinks of you, not because you begged, but because you didn't. That is the paradox of rejection. The man who needs her least is the one she cannot forget, not because he manipulated her, but because he carried himself with rare composure. That's what rejection can build in you, the kind of self-respect that lingers long after the night is over. And here's the deepest layer: rejection strips you down until you realize you don't need anyone's acceptance to stand tall. That realization is terrifying at first, but once it clicks, it liberates you. You become dangerous, not because you hurt others, but because you cannot be controlled. You're no longer moved by threats of abandonment, by games of silence, by the push and pull of someone else's approval. You've stared at rejection and smiled back. That is the birth of an unbreakable man. What about you? Have you ever stayed in a half-hearted connection because you feared the final rejection? Have you ever begged for clarity when her inconsistency was the rejection itself? And when you look back at your life, did rejection actually destroy you? Or did it carve you into something stronger? Drop your truth in the comments. Rejection is the sharpening stone that takes the softness out of you. It doesn't just break your heart, it hardens your resolve. Every time you hear no, you're given a choice collapse into bitterness, or stand taller than before. The difference between the man who stays fragile and the man who becomes unbreakable is simple. One keeps clinging to what he lost. The other takes the pain and forges it into discipline. That's why rejection builds men. It strips away the fantasy that life will hand you what you want simply because you desire it. And it forces you to become the kind of man who can survive loss without losing himself. Think about the men who crumble after rejection. They spend months replaying old messages, stalking her photos, comparing themselves to the guy she's with now. They let one woman's choice freeze their entire life. They drown in resentment and start believing all women are the same. But what they don't see is that the rejection wasn't the end, it was the test. A test of whether their backbone was built on her approval or on their own purpose. If your self-worth can be destroyed by one rejection, then you didn't have self-worth, you had dependency. And that's exactly what rejection exposes. Now picture the opposite. A man gets rejected, feels the sting, but doesn't flinch. He goes home, channels that energy into the gym, into his work, into leveling up. Months later, he looks back and realizes the rejection was the very fuel that drove his transformation. That man understands something most never will. Rejection is a compass. It doesn't just say no to her, it says yes to you, if you're willing to redirect the pain inward as fuel. That's why unbreakable men often have a history of brutal rejections, because each one taught them not to collapse, but to build. Here's something you need to see clearly. Rejection is often less about you and more about timing, compatibility, and her own state of mind. Yet you'll trick yourself into thinking it's a verdict on your entire existence. That's ego. That's illusion. When she says no, it doesn't mean you're worthless. It means the fit wasn't there. And that's information, not condemnation. The tactical move here is to treat rejection as data instead of spiraling into shame. Ask yourself, what did I learn about myself, about her, about what I want next? That shift in mindset turns rejection from a wound into a map. But don't get it twisted, some rejections are power plays. A woman might reject you not to leave, but to dominate. She'll say, maybe we should take a break. Not because she's leaving, but because she wants to see you sweat. She'll pull away affection just to measure how quickly you chase. This is where weak men collapse, throwing everything at her feet to win her back. But an unbreakable man doesn't chase manipulation. He calls the bluff. If she threatens to go, he opens the door. If she withdraws, he mirrors her calm. Why? Because he knows real desire can't be negotiated, and respect can't be begged. That's how you neutralize rejection when it's used as a weapon by refusing to let it touch your center. The brutal beauty of rejection is that it forces you to stand alone. And when you learn to stand alone, you stop being afraid of loss. You stop being terrified of abandonment. You realize that even if she walks away, you remain. Even if she chooses someone else, you're still here, building, breathing, moving forward. That realization is the core of masculine strength. Women can feel it, other men can sense it. It radiates in the way you walk, in the way you look people in the eye, in the way you never flinch at uncertainty. That's the gift of rejection. It teaches you to stop anchoring your identity in someone else's approval and start anchoring it in your own presence. So here's the final truth. Rejection doesn't break you. It reveals you. It shows you whether your confidence was real or a performance. It shows you whether you were chasing her or standing rooted in yourself. It shows you whether you're fragile or forged. And if you take it the right way, rejection doesn't just toughen you, it makes you free. Because once you've faced rejection and kept walking, there's nothing left to fear. No woman, no failure, no loss has power over you anymore. You become untouchable, not because you avoid pain, but because you've survived it enough times to know it cannot destroy you. She didn't break you. She revealed what you were too afraid to protect.